The question of gay priests and gay seminarians has been much in the spotlight lately, especially with comments made by Pope Francis, which I won't be repeating here. And so the media wants to know, is the Catholic Church going to be more accepting of gay priests and seminarians soon, as if this is an inevitable development in the slow march of progress that not even the Catholic Church is immune to? And the more speculation and editorializing I read and hear about gay priests, not to mention the chattering and debating about it in Catholic online circles, it highlights for me how confused our understanding and language is on this topic, especially with respect to the word gay as a description of identity. Because while homosexual activity isn't something new, the way we think about it is extremely novel compared to other times and places. And most modern people, from what I can tell, will just assume, well, that's a good thing, because surely we've become much more accepting and welcoming. But I imagine people operating under those kinds of assumptions about history would be surprised to find that homosexual activity, especially between men among respectable people, was not uncommon in the ancient Greco-Roman world. It was actually super common for someone to have a respectable career, a wife and children, but also willing to go down to the gymnasium with his friends, get naked, work out together, and then accidentally escalate things into something else. Or they might go to a dinner party and talk philosophy among respectable people, get a little intoxicated, and then the next thing you know, there's something like a homosexual orgy going on. This wasn't out of the ordinary, at least according to a lot of the literature. It's the kind of thing that might feature in a Socratic dialogue. But if you or I could go back in time and witness such a party firsthand, like the one depicted in Plato's Symposium, in which a group of respectable statesmen, aristocrats, and philosophers get a little drunk and decide to start debating the meaning of love. And one orator insists that love is best portrayed by the relationship of an older man with a younger adolescent, maybe teenage boy, in which the older man can provide mentorship, money, and society connections, while the adolescent can offer his beauty through sexual favors. Meanwhile, another laments with great passion his unrequited love for Socrates and his many attempts to seduce the latter, only to be ignored or tricked into engaging in philosophical dialogue instead. And if you were a person aligned with 20th or 21st century sensibilities, and you were able to witness such a gathering, you might say to the partygoers, "Oh, I see, you're gay." To which they would be like, "What does that mean?" And you might say, well, it's your sexual orientation that defines your social identity. It means that you are oriented to want to have sexual relationships with members of the same sex, or perhaps even be in a monogamous romantic arrangement with another man. At which point they'd be like, whoa, take it easy. What are you talking about? I'm married to a woman. I have children and a family with a woman. But I like to have fun with my male companions from time to time. But that isn't some fatal orientation or identity. To them, that would be like showing up at a dinner party in which there were some slightly tipsy people and then saying, "Oh, I see, you're all alcoholics." To which they would be like, I like to partake from time to time, but take it easy with the labels, you're just being rude at this point. Because in the ancient world, they understood that a human being cannot and should not be reduced to their mere appetites, and that to assume your social identity and sense of belonging and social status based on your mere appetites is kind of degrading and dehumanizing. They would have understood that a human being can and should choose their behavior rather than merely succumb to their appetites to the point of being defined by them. They might think that if the mood was right and they had no moral misgivings about something, well, sure, I'm going to indulge in this thing tonight. But just because I did on occasion, it doesn't mean that I need to be labeled by that indiscretion and adopt some socio-political identity based on it. I've tried to argue elsewhere what the ancient and medieval world would have thought of our sensibilities on this using this analogy. So imagine a man standing on a beach shore who notices someone struggling in the water and in need of help. And he's immediately aware of two competing desires within him. One is to be courageous and rescue the person in danger. The other is for self-preservation and safety. And ultimately, he decides to risk his own life to rescue the endangered person. Now, let me ask you this question, because he had a desire to avoid danger and remain where it was safe. Should we consider him and even identify him as a coward? Should he think of himself and consider himself a coward because he had this strong desire to avoid danger? Should he internalize this identity and frame every future decision through this lens? Of course not, because it isn't our desires, emotions, or our appetites that should define us. It's what we do with them. You and I are not the sum of our appetites, because that's, again, just it's so degrading. We are the sum of our choices and our actions. The modern world says because you have certain feelings or cravings, not only should you refuse to govern them or resist them, because that wouldn't be true to yourself, but you should even go as far as to identify yourself by those feelings. A person might have strong feelings tempting them to seek out a liaison with members of the same sex, but they might also want to have a wife and a family someday, and knowing that the more he indulges in same-sex activity, the more he will want it, because that's how our appetites work. And so he resolves to encourage his desires for procreative sexuality and avoid the rather immediate and short-term satisfaction of his homosexual passions. So in all of that context, I tend to agree with the ancients to insist on identifying someone as gay because they have certain desires, even desires that they act on sometimes. I think that significantly dehumanizes a person. And yes, I'll admit there are a lot of Catholic priests for whom this is a temptation. I'm not going to get into why that is or what the church should be doing about it, but yes, it's a reality and a problem in the Catholic Church. But to speak of such priests as gay priests is just wrong, because if they made vows of chastity and meant to keep them, then that's what should define them, not their temptations. A person committed to chastity is someone for whom their sexual temptations should be the last thing to use to slap a label on them. It would be like looking at someone who is tempted to overindulge in junk food or just food in general, but commits themselves to a healthy diet and largely manages to do so, and then calling them like an in-the-closet glutton who needs to embrace their identity. Like, that's your identity whether you succumb to it or not. That, on the face of it, is utterly ridiculous. And even if such priests, out of weakness, break their vows of chastity, still doesn't mean that they are gay priests. It means that they are a sinner who needs to make amends in order to succeed in their promises and in their commitments. Now, there are, of course, some priests who break their vows because they don't intend to keep them. And in those cases, it would be better to call them frauds than gay priests. They aren't priests who happen to be gay. They are imposters posing as something they have no intentions to be. And that's a whole other kind of very serious and scary problem. And the only other reason I can think of why we might want to embrace this language of gay priests would be if this was some kind of a title rather than a description, which of course is absurd on the face of it. Although something like it does seem to be common in a lot of mainline Protestant sects, so unless we want that kind of fiasco on our hands, it should be fairly obvious that we will want to avoid adopting their lexicon. Can I ask you to stick around for one extra minute? Because if you enjoyed that, well, first of all, thanks for watching. But now I could really benefit from your help, which you can do in a couple of ways. You can check out my sponsor, Real Estate for Life, who is a network of pro-family real estate agents that can connect you with one in your area. So if you're looking to buy a home, check them out at realestateforlife.org. And if you can help out directly financially, I tend to trust that most of my regular viewers can afford to drop a $5 tip in my jar once a year. And if they did, I wouldn't have to worry about the financial viability of this effort. So if you do want to support, you can go to brianholdsworth.ca/support or join me in my locals community to get exclusive content and chances to interact with me and members of the like-minded community at brianholdsworth.locals.com.